Keanu Reeves walked up to the entrance of the event he was hosting, ready to greet his fans and immerse himself in the excitement of the evening. He had been looking forward to this moment for weeks. But as soon as he stepped toward the door, a security guard stepped in front of him. "Sorry, sir, you can't come in," the guard said firmly. Keanu paused, momentarily stunned. "I'm Keanu Reeves. I'm the guest of honor for this event," he explained, trying to keep the situation calm. The guard looked at him with an unblinking stare. "You need a ticket to enter. No exceptions." Keanu's brow furrowed. This wasn't how he imagined the night going. There had to be some mistake. But no matter how many times he tried to explain, the security guard, whose name tag read David, was resolute. "Look, I'm sorry, but you're not on the list. No entry without a ticket. That's the rule," David replied, still not recognizing the star in front of him. Keanu couldn't believe what was happening. He was being blocked from his own event by someone who didn't even recognize him. It was a surreal moment, one of those situations where you're sure the world has somehow turned upside down. What would you do if you were in Keanu's shoes? If the world suddenly turned against you and you couldn't even get into the event you organized? You'll want to stick around to find out how this crazy situation unfolds. But first, make sure you subscribe because what happens next will blow your mind. Keanu Reeves has always been known for his quiet, down-to-earth demeanor. While his name was known worldwide and his face was instantly recognizable, he lived a life very different from the typical Hollywood superstar. Behind the fame, Keanu's story was one of loss, perseverance, and a deep understanding of the fleeting nature of life. Keanu had experienced some of the toughest challenges life could throw at him, losing family members, struggling with the death of close friends, and enduring moments of deep personal grief. But through it all, he had maintained an air of humility. Unlike many of his peers in the industry, Keanu never let his fame go to his head. He lived a simple life, often spending time with his close circle of friends, supporting charities, and driving around Los Angeles in a modest car. In his younger years, Keanu was known for his passion for acting, but he also loved music and was always more interested in spending time behind the scenes, rather than basking in the spotlight. He kept his private life largely out of the media, and many times people who met him were shocked by how humble and approachable he was, despite his fame. On this particular night, Keanu was about to attend an event he had put together to raise funds for a cause close to his heart, one that helped young people pursuing careers in the arts. It was supposed to be a night of celebration and goodwill. But now, standing at the entrance, blocked by a security guard who seemed to be following protocol with no sense of who was standing before him, Keanu was at a loss. How had things gone so wrong so quickly? On the other side of the door stood David, the security guard who had just stopped Keanu from entering his own event. David didn't know who Keanu was. Not really. To him, Keanu was just another person trying to bypass the rules. David had been working security at events like this for over 5 years. He'd seen all kinds of people, celebrities, politicians, high-profile businessmen. He had security clearance to keep them all out if necessary. His job was simple: follow the rules. And the rule tonight was clear: no one gets in without a ticket, no exceptions. David's life was far from glamorous. He had grown up in a small town, raised by a single mother. Things were never easy, but David had always prided himself on his work ethic. He worked 2 jobs and rarely had time for anything outside of his daily grind. He wasn't interested in fame or fortune. What mattered to him was his family, the few friends he had, and his ability to stick to the rules that had given him a sense of stability in a life that had otherwise been unpredictable. But standing there, facing Keanu Reeves, David couldn't help but feel a tug of uncertainty. His strict adherence to the rules had worked for him up until now, but this moment felt different. Something in Keanu's demeanor, a calmness, an almost apologetic air, made David pause, but he couldn't let go of the rules. Keanu tried to reason with him. "David, please, I'm here for the event. I helped organize it," he said, trying to maintain his composure. David looked at him, squinting as if trying to figure out if he was being tricked. "I don't know who you are, and I don't care. My job is to keep people out who don't have tickets, and you, sir, don't have a ticket. Keanu's heart sank. This wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. This was about more than a ticket. There was something bigger happening here. He was, after all, the guest of honor. His mind raced as he tried to come up with a way out of this bizarre situation. Keanu had faced many obstacles in his life, but never one like this. But David, lost in his rules and his own sense of order, didn't realize that the man standing before him wasn't just any guest. Keanu Reeves had become more than a famous actor. He had grown into a symbol of resilience, kindness, and humility. Yet David only saw him as a potential security risk. What will happen next? Will Keanu get inside? Or will this clash of personalities spiral into something far more unpredictable? Stick with us as the situation intensifies and unfolds in ways you won't expect. The tension between Keanu and David was palpable. Keanu stood there trying to understand why this was happening. He had organized this event. His name was all over the promotional material. How could someone not recognize him? But as much as he wanted to argue, he realized that David wasn't budging. There was no compromise, no room for negotiation. The rules were the rules. Keanu took a deep breath, trying to keep his frustration in check. "Listen, I'm not trying to make a scene here," he said calmly. "I'm Keanu Reeves, and I'm supposed to be inside. I'm the one who planned this event." David remained unmoved. "I don't know who you are, and that's not my concern. You don't have a ticket, and without a ticket you can't come in." A few people started to gather around, sensing something wasn't right. Keanu could hear murmurs from the crowd, some confused, others curious. But David's stance didn't change. He kept his eyes locked on Keanu, his expression hardening. Keanu glanced around. The event was a fundraiser for young artists, a cause that meant a lot to him. His mind raced as he wondered what the heck had gone wrong. Was it a miscommunication with the event organizers? Had someone forgotten to send him a pass? Nothing made sense. But at that moment it didn't matter. All that mattered was getting inside and salvaging the night. David's voice interrupted his thoughts. "If you keep arguing with me, I'm going to have to call for backup," he warned, his tone unwavering. "I'm not playing games." Keanu's heart dropped. This wasn't how he imagined this night would unfold. He had been looking forward to helping others, showing up for a cause he truly believed in, but now he was stuck outside, fighting with a man who had no idea who he was. The crowd around them grew larger. Some started recording the situation, their phones aimed at the unlikely confrontation. Keanu knew this could get ugly, and he didn't want that. He didn't want to make a spectacle of himself or the event. But there was no denying that things were quickly spiraling out of control. David, on the other hand, was beginning to feel the pressure. The longer this dragged on, the more uncomfortable he became. He wasn't accustomed to being in situations like this. He had always followed the rules, and for him that was enough. But now he couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, he had misjudged the situation. As the crowd murmured in confusion, a couple of people from inside the event approached the entrance. They recognized Keanu immediately and waved at him, clearly puzzled as to why he was still standing outside. "Keanu, what's going on? Why aren't you inside?" one of the organizers asked, clearly alarmed. Keanu sighed in relief at the sight of familiar faces, but David's voice cut through the air, still firm. "I'm sorry, but he doesn't have a ticket. I can't let him in." The organizer looked at David in disbelief. "What do you mean he doesn't have a ticket? He's Keanu Reeves, the one who set up this entire event." David's face flushed. He looked back at Keanu, who gave him a small, understanding nod. It was clear that David was just doing his job. But this was no ordinary situation. The rules, it seemed, had led him into a corner he couldn't escape from. David hesitated. His mind was racing. He couldn't back down, could he? He had been trained to follow the rules, no exceptions. But something in Keanu's eyes made him second-guess everything. This wasn't just a celebrity trying to skip the line. This was someone who had clearly been overlooked, someone who had been treated unfairly. The situation hung in the balance. Keanu remained calm, still trying to de-escalate things, while David fought with the inner conflict of upholding the rules and admitting a mistake. "I just want to get inside," Keanu said quietly, his voice carrying an air of patience. "That's all," Can we just get this sorted out? David stood there, torn. He could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, and with every passing second the pressure mounted. He glanced at the organizers, then back at Keanu. It was clear that this wasn't a simple matter of following the rules anymore. It was about a bigger mistake, one that had already escalated far beyond what either of them had intended. Then, in a moment of uncertainty, David made a decision. "I'll have to call someone," David muttered, stepping away from Keanu, to radio for backup. Keanu stood quietly, his thoughts racing. He didn't want to escalate the situation further, but it was becoming increasingly clear that something had gone wrong behind the scenes. Was this a misunderstanding? Or was there something more to the story? Why wasn't anyone at the event aware of his role? The minutes felt like hours as Keanu waited, standing at the entrance to his own event, the crowd murmuring around him. He couldn't help but wonder what had gone wrong, and how would he ever be able to fix this now? As David stepped away to radio for backup, Keanu stood frozen at the entrance, his mind racing. The situation was spiraling out of control, and he couldn't figure out how something so simple had become so complicated. The event was supposed to be a celebration, an opportunity to give back to the community and raise funds for a cause that was close to his heart. Instead, he was stuck outside, trying to explain to a security guard who couldn't even recognize him. David's voice crackled through the radio, asking for help. Keanu could hear the frustration building in the guard's voice as he tried to explain the situation. It was clear now David wasn't going to back down easily. He wasn't going to let Keanu into the event unless he was forced to. Keanu took a deep breath. This wasn't about ego. It wasn't about the fact that he was famous. He wasn't asking for special treatment. He simply wanted to do what he had come there to do. The people inside the event were waiting for him. This wasn't just a miscommunication. It was a moment that felt bigger than either of them, one that involved more than just rules and exceptions. Keanu's thoughts began to shift. Maybe this was the universe's way of reminding him that life was unpredictable. Maybe this was an opportunity to confront the very thing he had spent years trying to avoid: conflict. After all, this wasn't just about getting inside. It was about showing up for something important, something bigger than himself. It was about the people who had come to support the cause and how they'd be affected if the situation escalated further. The minutes dragged on, feeling like an eternity. The crowd that had gathered around the entrance began to grow restless, their curiosity piqued by the standoff between the famous actor and the unyielding security guard. Whispers spread through the crowd. Was this some kind of publicity stunt? Was Keanu really being denied entry to his own event? The tension in the air was thick, the energy palpable. Keanu could feel it all around him, the weight of the situation, the eyes of the crowd, and the sense that something was about to give. Then, a familiar voice broke through the noise. "Keanu!" It was one of the event organizers, a woman named Sarah who had been working alongside him to plan the night. She hurried over, her face full of confusion and concern. "What's going on?" Sarah asked, looking between Keanu and David. "Why are you standing out here? This isn't how it's supposed to go. You're the guest of honor." Keanu sighed, trying to keep his frustration in check. "I've been trying to explain that to him, but it's no use. David here doesn't seem to recognize me." David, hearing his name, turned around sharply. "I'm just doing my job. Follow the rules. If you don't have a ticket, you don't get in." Sarah's eyes widened. "A ticket?" she repeated, clearly shocked. "Keanu doesn't need a ticket. He's the one who set this whole thing up." The two of them turned toward David, who was now looking more and more uncomfortable as the reality of the situation hit him. He hadn't just made a simple mistake. He had blocked one of the most well-known actors in the world from attending an event that he himself had planned. Keanu watched David's face soften as he realized the gravity of the situation. David was a man of principle, someone who believed in fairness and order, but now he was faced with a choice: continue following the rules, or accept that sometimes the rules needed to be bent, especially in extraordinary circumstances. The pressure was mounting on David, but he knew that backing down now would make him look weak in front of the growing crowd. He had to decide quickly what kind of man he wanted to be. Would he continue to stick rigidly to protocol, or would he take the risk of admitting his mistake and letting Keanu in? Just as the situation seemed poised to escalate further, a loud voice from behind the crowd called out, "Is everything okay here?" It was Marcus, another organizer, walking briskly toward the entrance with a group of event staff. "I've been hearing about some confusion," Marcus said, his eyes scanning the tense scene. His gaze settled on David. "What's going on?" David hesitated, looking from Marcus to Sarah and then to Keanu. He finally dropped his gaze and sighed. "I didn't realize who he was," David admitted quietly, his voice almost apologetic. "I've been following the rules, but maybe I was wrong." Keanu, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, stepped forward. "It's okay. No harm done," he said with a smile, his voice calm and understanding. "I know you're just doing your job." David looked visibly relieved, but the tension didn't disappear immediately. The crowd was still watching, waiting for some resolution. Marcus gave a small nod of acknowledgement before turning to Keanu. "You're good to go inside. We've got everything ready for you. We'll take care of the rest." Keanu nodded gratefully and turned back toward the entrance. With a quick glance at David, who was still standing by the door, Keanu gave him a reassuring smile. "It happens. We're all just trying to do our best." With that, Keanu stepped inside the venue, the chaos of the outside world fading behind him as the doors closed and the crowd's murmurs faded into the background. For a moment it felt like everything had returned to normal, but inside, things weren't as they seemed. Keanu's night was far from over. The journey he had begun was only just starting, and what lay ahead was going to be more complicated than he could have ever imagined. But the lesson was clear. Life like tonight was unpredictable, and sometimes the most extraordinary moments come from the most unexpected sources. Keanu stepped into the event, finally free from the chaos that had kept him outside. The atmosphere was much different now that he was inside, livelier, with people mingling, talking and laughing. Music played softly in the background, and the room was filled with art, paintings from young, talented artists that had been donated to the cause. Everything looked perfect, but Keanu's mind kept returning to the surreal moment he had just experienced outside. The tension had not fully lifted. As he walked past the guests, he couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was at play here. He had just been blocked from his own event by someone who had no idea who he was. He had never experienced anything like this before, and it left him with an unsettling sense of vulnerability. What if this was a sign? What if things were changing in ways he wasn't ready for? As Keanu made his way to the front of the room, where the speeches were to begin, he noticed a familiar face in the crowd. It was Sarah, the organizer who had come to his rescue outside. She smiled and waved, but there was something in her eyes. A glint of nervousness, maybe concern. Keanu raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. He had too many thoughts racing through his mind. Before he could reach Sarah, however, Marcus, the other organizer, stepped up to him. His face was serious, even a bit tense. "Keanu," Marcus began, his voice low, "we've got a problem." Keanu paused, the weight of his earlier confrontation still hanging in the air. "What kind of problem?" "I don't want to alarm you, but it looks like the event funds might not be what we thought," Marcus continued. "There's a discrepancy with the donations and the amount that was promised to the cause. Something's off." Keanu felt his stomach drop. He had put so much effort into this event, believing it would make a real difference. The last thing he wanted to hear was that there had been a problem with the funds, the artists, the kids, the people who had supported because none of them deserved to be let down like this. His mind raced. Could this be why everything had felt so off tonight? First being blocked at the door and now this. Was it just a string of bad luck, or was something more serious going on? "I don't understand," Keanu said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What's going on with the money? How could this happen?" "I don't know the details yet," Marcus replied, glancing over his shoulder, as if making sure no one overheard them. "But we've had some people in the back going over the numbers. We think some of the funds may have been misdirected or even misappropriated." Keanu's mind swirled with possibilities. He trusted the team. He'd worked closely with them for months to ensure everything was done correctly. But now, in the ECE, heat of the moment. He couldn't shake the nagging feeling that someone might be betraying him, that there was more at play here than a simple mistake. As the conversation continued, Keanu's heart pounded in his chest. His mind flashed back to the earlier moment outside, when David had so rigidly stuck to the rules. It had been a simple misunderstanding, but now, in the face of this much bigger issue, Keanu began to wonder if his whole life had been guided by the wrong sense of order. Was everything he'd worked for now on the verge of unraveling? Just as the room felt heavier with doubt, Sarah approached them, her expression tense. "Keanu, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice full of regret. "We've had an issue with the donations. Something's not right." The knot in Keanu's stomach tightened. "What do you mean? What's going on?" "It's hard to explain right now, but we believe someone may have been tampering with the accounts," Sarah said quietly, glancing at Marcus for confirmation. "And I'm afraid it's worse than we thought." The shock of it hit Keanu like a ton of bricks. The night he had been looking forward to so much, the event that was meant to bring people together to make a positive difference, was now tainted by something much darker. Who could have done this? Who would want to sabotage something so important? Keanu's mind raced with questions. Had someone on the inside betrayed him? Or was it something larger, something systemic that he couldn't even begin to understand? It wasn't just about the money. It was about the trust that had been broken. The people who had come to the event were there because they believed in the cause, believed in the people who had organized it. Now that belief was shaken to its core. As the weight of this revelation sank in, Keanu felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness. For a moment, the world around him seemed to blur. The crowd, the decorations, the music, it all faded away. He had no idea who to trust anymore. Even the people closest to him seemed distant. Then, something unexpected happened. As the three of them stood in stunned silence, the door to the back room opened and a figure stepped into the room. It was David, the security guard. He was holding an envelope. "Keanu, I think you should see this," David said, his voice uncertain. He hesitated for a moment, then handed Keanu the envelope. Keanu took it, his hands shaking slightly as he opened it. Inside was a single page with a name, Rebecca Jameson, the lead organizer, and a series of bank account numbers, donation amounts, and strange discrepancies that Keanu couldn't quite make sense of. But it was clear enough. The numbers didn't add up, and there was something incredibly suspicious about the whole thing. David stepped forward cautiously. I'm not sure what this means, but I think you need to see it. I know I'm just the security guard, but I've been around long enough to know when something doesn't feel right." Keanu looked up at him, meeting his gaze. For the first time, Keanu saw something in David's eyes that wasn't just about following the rules. There was a genuine sense of concern, of wanting to help. Keanu nodded slowly. "Thank you," he said, his voice low, a mix of gratitude and disbelief. What had just been revealed to him? Was this a mistake, or was it the start of something much darker that could ruin everything he had worked for? The emotional climax of the evening had arrived, and with it, Keanu realized that the journey he thought he was on, one of charity and hope, was quickly becoming a battle against betrayal, and the night was far from over. The room felt colder now. The tension that had hung over Keanu since his confrontation with David outside was now a heavy weight on his chest. The revelation about the missing funds, the potential betrayal from someone he had trusted, everything seemed to be spiraling out of control. He couldn't shake the feeling that the event, which had been meant to bring people together, was now on the brink of falling apart. David's unexpected intervention had led Keanu to a crucial piece of the puzzle. The envelope with the suspicious bank account details was a game-changer. Keanu knew he couldn't ignore it. His mind was already spinning, processing the possible implications, but he also knew he couldn't let this moment define the whole night. The guests were still mingling, unaware of the storm brewing behind the scenes. The event had a purpose, a cause worth fighting for, but right now it felt like that purpose was slipping away. Keanu took a deep breath and turned to Marcus and Sarah. They had both seen the envelope, and the weight of what it implied was obvious to them. "We need to do something," Keanu said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "We can't let this go unnoticed. We have to confront this. Marcus nodded, his face grim. We need to figure out who's behind this before it gets out of hand. If word gets out about the financial discrepancy, it could ruin everything. Sarah placed a hand on Keanu's shoulder. We've worked too hard for this. We can't let one bad apple spoil it all. We'll fix this together. Keanu gave them both a small smile, grateful for their unwavering support. But there was still a nagging voice in the back of his head, questioning whether he could trust the people closest to him. Could he trust Marcus? Sarah? What if the betrayal went deeper than they realized? But for now he pushed those thoughts aside. He had a responsibility, not just to the event but to the people who had come to support it. They deserved answers. Let's go to the back room and figure this out, Keanu said. We can't waste any more time. The three of them made their way to the back, where the event staff had been organizing the donations and preparing the records. As they entered the room, the staff members, who had been working tirelessly to make everything run smoothly, looked up in surprise. What's going on? One of them asked, her voice laced with concern. Keanu didn't waste any time. He laid the envelope on the table. We've discovered a discrepancy in the donations. Someone's been tampering with the funds. The room fell silent. The staff exchanged uneasy glances, and Keanu could feel the collective weight of their anxiety. We need to go over everything, Keanu said firmly. Every transaction, every account. We're not leaving until we know who did this. The group set to work, pulling up spreadsheets, tracking donations and comparing numbers. It was a slow process, but as the hours ticked by, a picture began to emerge. It wasn't just a mistake, it was intentional. Funds had been redirected to an account that didn't belong to the charity. Someone had been siphoning off donations, and they had done it carefully, covering their tracks to avoid detection. Keanu felt his heart sink as the reality of the situation became clear. This wasn't just about a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was a betrayal, and the person responsible had been operating right under their noses for months. As the staff continued to dig through the records, Keanu's mind raced. Who could have done this? Who would be willing to betray the trust of everyone involved? After what felt like an eternity, Sarah spoke up. Keanu, I think we found something. It's Rebecca. She's the one behind this. The room seemed in a freeze. The name hit Keanu like a punch to the gut. Rebecca Jameson was one of the lead organizers, someone who had been with the team since the beginning. He had trusted her completely. He had believed in her passion for the cause, in her commitment to making the event a success. And now it seemed she had been using her position to line her own pockets. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, trying to process what he had just heard. Are you sure? He asked, his voice tight. Sarah nodded solemnly. We've traced the funds. They've been funneled into an account under her name. Keanu's mind spun. Rebecca had been a close ally, and now she was the one responsible for the crisis. The betrayal cut deep, but he couldn't afford to wallow in disbelief. They needed to act quickly. We need to confront her, Keanu said, his tone resolute. We can't let this go unchallenged. Marcus stepped forward, his face determined. I'll handle it. We'll confront her and get to the bottom of this. Keanu looked at Sarah and then at David, who had quietly entered the room during the investigation. David's eyes met his with understanding. There was no turning back now. The group made their way to the back office, where Rebecca was meeting with some of the other staff. She looked up in surprise as they entered, but before she could say anything, Marcus spoke. Rebecca, we know what you've been doing, Marcus said, his voice cold and unwavering. We know about the missing funds, and we have proof. Rebecca's face drained of color. She stood up quickly, her eyes wide with panic. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice shaking. You've been stealing from the event, Keanu said, his voice firm. We've traced the donations. We know it was you. Rebecca's eyes flickered, a mixture of fear and guilt. She didn't deny it. Instead, she collapsed into the chair, her shoulders sagging as if the weight of her actions had finally caught up with her. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she whispered. I thought I could take just a little at first, but then it kept going and I couldn't stop. Keanu felt a mix of anger and sadness flood over him. He had wanted to believe that the people he worked with were as passionate about the cause as he was, but Rebecca's greed had shattered that illusion. "We'll make sure this gets resolved," Marcus said, his voice unwavering. "But this isn't something we can just ignore." As Rebecca was escorted out of the event, Keanu stood still, processing what had just unfolded. The betrayal had been hard to face, but in that moment, he realized something important. The cause was still bigger than any one person. The damage could be repaired. The mission could still move forward. Keanu looked around the room, at the guests who were still laughing and enjoying the evening. The event had its flaws, but it had also accomplished something powerful. People had come together for a purpose, despite the setbacks, despite the challenges. And that, Keanu thought, was what truly mattered. The night wasn't a failure. It was a lesson in resilience, in the power of trust, and in the importance of standing up for what's right. As the evening wore on, Keanu realized that while some things in life could be out of his control, he had the power to choose how to react. And in the face of betrayal, he had chosen to keep moving forward. The event had been saved, not by perfection, but by perseverance. And that, in itself, was enough. As the final guests began to trickle out of the event, Keanu stood by the door, his hand loosely resting on the polished wood frame. The evening's chaos had settled into an uneasy calm, the tension from earlier dissipating, but not completely gone. The air felt thick with unspoken words, as if the weight of everything that had transpired had left an invisible mark on the evening. Keanu glanced around the venue, seeing the last remnants of the night, empty champagne glasses, half-finished plates of food, and decorations that were now starting to sag. It was hard to believe the night had started so beautifully, only to descend into so much turmoil. Yet, despite it all, he couldn't shake the feeling that they had made it through the worst of it. The crisis had been averted, and the event, though tainted by betrayal, had achieved something important. He turned his attention to Sarah, who was sitting at a nearby table, carefully going over the paperwork from the event. Marcus was speaking with a few staff members in the corner, ensuring that all the logistics had been properly handled and that Rebecca's betrayal would be reported to the proper authorities. The damage had been contained, but they all knew this wouldn't be the last time they would have to face such challenges in this line of work. Keanu sighed and sat down next to Sarah. "It's over," he said quietly, his voice reflecting the exhaustion that had settled deep in his bones. "But I can't help but wonder what happens now." Sarah looked up, offering him a tired smile. "It's over, yes, but the cause, that's still going strong. We got through it, Keanu. We made it to the end, and we didn't let it break us. And that's what matters." Keanu nodded slowly, his gaze drifting toward the door as he thought about the night's events. The betrayal, the confusion, the near collapse of everything they had worked for, it had all felt so overwhelming. But Sarah was right. They had made it through, and they had learned valuable lessons along the way. He looked back at Sarah. "I guess that's the thing, huh? The cause has always been bigger than all of us, even when things go wrong. We can make mistakes, we can have setbacks, but the mission, the people, it's what keeps us going." Sarah smiled, a hint of pride in her eyes. "Exactly, and let's be real here. This whole thing wasn't just about the money or the event. It was about showing people what we stand for, what we can accomplish together. The real impact was never about a single night. It's about the bigger picture." Keanu paused for a moment, reflecting on her words. The mission had always been bigger than any one person, and though the night had nearly unraveled in the most unexpected way, it was clear to him now that they had still made a difference, just not in the way they had originally envisioned. "Do you think anyone else noticed?" Keanu asked, his voice still tinged with doubt. Sarah's eyes met his, unwavering. Of course they noticed, but not just the trouble. They saw us overcome it. They saw us stand strong and continue to fight for the cause, no matter what happened. Behind the scenes, people respect that. They'll remember that. Keanu felt a weight lift from his chest. There would be no perfect resolution. There would always be challenges, things they couldn't control, people they couldn't trust. But the people who had supported the cause that night weren't there for perfection. They were there for the impact, and that was something he could hold on to. Just then David walked up to them, his posture still as rigid as ever, but there was a softness in his eyes now, something more human than just the no-nonsense security guard he had appeared. To be earlier in the evening. Keanu, David began, glancing around the room with a slight, almost imperceptible nod. I just wanted to say, I'm glad you got everything under control, and I hope you realize something. This event, it wasn't just about the money or the donations. You gave people hope, you gave them something to believe in, and that's the real gift. Keanu blinked, surprised by the sincerity in David's voice. The security guard had started out as an obstacle, but in that moment, Keanu saw him in a new light. Maybe it wasn't just about being a barrier. Maybe David was part of something, bigger than he had initially understood. Keanu stood up, offering David a hand. Thanks, man, seriously. I didn't expect to be on this journey with you, but you really made a difference tonight. I can't tell you how much it means. David shook his hand firmly, nodding. Just doing my job, Keanu. But if there's one thing I've learned tonight, it's that things don't always go as planned, but it's how we deal with the unexpected that matters. Keanu smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. You're right. Thanks again. As David turned to leave, Keanu felt a rush of gratitude. In the end, the people who had made the event happen, people like Sarah, Marcus, David, had proven that no matter the obstacles, they would always rise above. Together, Keanu turned back to Sarah, who was still going through paperwork. He could see that she too had felt the weight of the night. The exhaustion was evident in her face, but there was also a sense of accomplishment that couldn't be taken away. Well, Keanu said, taking a deep breath, we've got a long road ahead of us, but at least we're still standing. Sarah looked up at him, her eyes bright with determination. We always will be, Keanu smiled. The crisis had tested him, pushed him to the edge. But now more than ever he understood what it meant to stay true to his values, to persevere in the face of adversity, and to trust the people around him. The night had started with chaos, with doubt, but it had ended with a renewed sense of purpose. As they stood together, looking out at the empty room, Keanu knew that the journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. This final chapter brings the story to its resolution. Keanu and his team reflect on the challenges they faced and the lessons they learned. They find strength in each other, and in the cause they have dedicated themselves. To the evening ends with a sense of accomplishment, despite the obstacles, and a hopeful look toward the future. As the final remnants of the event were cleaned up, Keanu took a moment to step outside. The cool night air brushed against his face, clearing his thoughts. The cacophony of voices from inside had quieted, but the weight of the night's event still lingered in his mind. Though the betrayal had been exposed and the chaos had been managed, there was no denying that the storm wasn't entirely over. The ripples of what had transpired would spread far beyond the walls of the venue. There were still questions to answer, people to reassure, and consequences to face. Keanu leaned against the brick wall of the building, his gaze fixed on the twinkling lights in the distance. His mind kept returning to Rebecca. She had been a cornerstone of the team. Her passion had been undeniable, and now that passion had been corrupted by greed. It was a harsh lesson in trust, one that would stay with him long after the night was over. Keanu, you okay? Sarah's voice broke through his thoughts. He looked up to find her standing at the edge of the doorway, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the overhead lights. Her eyes were searching, concerned. I'm fine, he said, straightening up. Just thinking. Sarah stepped closer, her expression thoughtful. About Rebecca? Keanu nodded, rubbing his forehead. Yeah, I can't shake the feeling that this wasn't just her doing. There's something bigger at play here, something we're not seeing. Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly as she processed his words. You think someone else might be involved? I'm not sure, Keanu said, a frown tugging at the corners of his lips. But it feels like it's more than just one person taking advantage of the system. Someone had to have been pulling strings. Sarah didn't say anything at first, letting Keanu's words hang in the air. She had always been able to read him like an open book, and right now she could see that the events of the night had shaken him more than he was willing to admit. "You're right," Sarah finally said. "There's something off about all this, but we need to figure out what before it spirals even further." Keanu looked back at the venue, where the last few staff members were still cleaning up. "We've already taken the first step. We've stopped Rebecca. But it doesn't end there. We need to investigate further, talk to everyone who was involved. There's no way we can let this slide." "I'll help," Sarah said firmly. "We'll get to the bottom of it together." Keanu nodded gratefully. "Thanks, Sarah. I couldn't do this without you." The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and investigations. Keanu, Sarah, Marcus, and David worked tirelessly to piece together the puzzle that was slowly beginning to reveal itself. They spoke to everyone involved with the event, staff, volunteers, even vendors, and what they uncovered sent shockwaves through their team. It wasn't just Rebecca who had been involved. There was a larger web of people, each of them complicit in the scheme, each of them profiting off the donations meant for the cause. But the real twist, the mastermind behind the entire operation wasn't someone they had suspected at all. It was someone close to Keanu, someone he had trusted implicitly. Keanu sat in the conference room, staring at the documents spread out before him. The facts were undeniable. The trail led back to none other than his business partner, Alex Torres. Keanu's blood ran cold as he processed the information. Alex had been his confidant, the person he had trusted most in this entire endeavor. They had shared ideas, dreams, and plans for the event. Alex was a part of the team, a pivotal figure behind the scenes. And now it seemed he had been the one pulling the strings all along. How could I have been so blind? Keanu muttered under his breath, running a hand through his hair. Sarah, sitting beside him, placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You couldn't have known. It's not your fault. He was good at hiding it." Marcus leaned forward, his face grim. "We need to confront him, Keanu. Now, before it gets out of hand." Keanu nodded, his jaw clenched with determination. The anger inside him was building, but he had learned from the past few days that anger alone wouldn't solve anything. They needed evidence. They needed a plan. "I'll talk to him," Keanu said quietly. "But I'm not doing it alone." Sarah and Marcus both nodded. The group of them had become a tight-knit team, bound together by the trials they had faced. They weren't going to let Alex or anyone else destroy what they had worked so hard to build. Keanu's heart raced as he walked into the conference room where Alex was waiting. The man who had once been his closest ally now sat across from him, his expression unreadable. "Keanu," Alex greeted him with a tight smile. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Don't play games with me, Alex," Keanu replied, his voice steady but cold. "We know everything. We know what you've been doing. The missing funds, the manipulations, it's all come to light." For a moment, Alex didn't speak. He just stared at Keanu, his eyes calculating. Then, slowly, he leaned back in his gi chair, his expression turning defensive. "You think you've got it all figured out, don't you?" Alex said, his voice almost mocking. "This isn't what you think it is." Keanu shook his head. "Don't lie to me, Alex. You've been siphoning off donations for months. You've been using the cause we both care about for your own personal gain." Alex's jaw clenched, but there was no denying it. The evidence was irrefutable. He could feel the weight of the truth pressing down on him. "Why, Alex?" Keanu asked, his voice cracking with emotion. "Why would you do this?" Alex sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I got greedy. I thought I could get away with it. It started small, just a little here and there, but then it grew. The money, the power, it all felt too good to stop. But I never meant for it to hurt you, Keanu. You've always been like a brother to me." Keanu's heart wavered for a moment, torn between anger and betrayal. But he quickly reminded himself why they were here. This wasn't about forgiveness. It was about holding Alex accountable for his actions. "I trusted you," Keanu said quietly. "And you betrayed that trust. The damage you've caused. It's not something I can easily forget." Alex looked away, shame evident in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Keanu, I really am, but I couldn't stop. I was in too deep." The silence between them was deafening. Keanu could feel his anger building again. But he also understood something in that moment. There was no going back. The betrayal had been too great, and Alex had to face the consequences of his actions. "You're done," Keanu said, his voice firm. "I'm reporting you to the authorities. I'm not going to let you get away with this." Alex's face hardened. "Do what you have to do," he spat, before storming out of the room. Keanu sat there for a moment, his heart heavy with the finality of it all. But as he looked around the room, he knew one thing for sure. Despite the betrayal, despite the loss, the cause would go on. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. Keanu's journey had been a roller coaster of emotions: betrayal, trust, failure, and redemption. But through it all, the one thing that remained constant was his commitment to the cause and the people who had stood by him. Now, as the dust settled, he turned to the audience, his supporters, his friends, and his team, and asked the question that had been on his mind from the beginning. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? How far would you go to protect what you believe in? Share your thoughts with me below, and if this story has resonated with you, if it's reminded you of the power of resilience and integrity, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because we've only just begun, and together we'll keep fighting for what's right. With that, Keanu's story came to an end, but the lessons learned and the connections made would continue to shape the future.